Hello, my name is Elsa and welcome to another booktube video. Today I am doing a September reading wrap-up, and September was a bit of a funny month because although I felt like I read quite a lot, there was a couple of books that I DNF'd and there was a lot of books that I read part of and either haven't finished, now it's early October, or have just finished. Like there was some that I put down for a little bit. But anyway, I'm going to talk to you about the books that either I gave up on or have actually finished. And then some others that I finished in the first couple of days of October I will talk to you about in my October wrap-up, just to keep things straight and organised. So at the start of September I went on holiday for a week, and part of my intention with the holiday was for it to be very relaxing and spend a lot of time reading. The first book that I read was A Demon in Silver by R.S. Ford. I don't have this to show you because I left it in the house that we were staying in. This is a fantasy novel. I picked it up at an event recently, and it was actually an ARC, so it had been sitting on my shelf for a couple of months, and it came out in June or July this year. Fantasy novel about a farm girl who suddenly discovers that she has magical abilities in a world where magical abilities have really disappeared. No one's had them in 100 years. Unfortunately, I gave up on this book before I got to the end of it. I maybe got about a third of the way through before I stopped. It started well, and it did some things that were interesting. It had different narrators and set in slightly different time periods. Some bits were a little choppy and I didn't quite understand how they connect to the rest of it. I think if I had continued with the book and the rest of the series, then it would have come together a bit more, but because I didn't, there were a lot of unanswered questions there. Something I found interesting in it was that magic hasn't been around in the world of the main story for about 100 years, and while yes, that is a long time, this girl who discovers her magical powers lives with her grandfather, and obviously for him 100 years is still not quite living memory, but his parents would have been familiar with it, and certainly his grandparents would have been familiar with magic. So when she starts exhibiting signs of these magical powers, he's heard stories about this, and I thought that was really interesting because it didn't occur to me immediately when I heard about it. It was like 100 years, loads of time ago, but I thought that added an interesting aspect to it. But what I disliked with it was I felt like the first chunk of the book, first 100 pages or so, was a lot more polished than the rest. I started noticing that it was getting less and less polished, and the writing was just not as good the further I went into it. It was also a book that made me think of, if you've seen examples on Twitter in particular of how I would write my day if it was being written by a male author, and it's a woman saying, oh, I walked down the stairs and my breasts bounced along, and silly things like that, and it's very focused about women's bodies and things like that. I had never particularly encountered stuff like that in books before, but this was the sort of book where there would be phrases that would leap out of me as being like, it is very clear that this has been written by a man. I can't think of the exact phrasing of it, but one example was this woman was in a white dress and it had got soaked with fresh blood, and he described it as the fabric becoming black and like shimmering or something like that. And I thought, this is very obviously a man who has not seen white fabric exposed to blood before. But it was lots of stuff like that. It just read really badly, and I was getting, although I was interested in the plot and I wanted to see where it was going, I was getting so frustrated with the writing, and eventually I just gave up. I was like, this is going to annoy me too much. If anyone has read that and has got to the end of the book, I would love to hear what you thought about it, and if you thought that the writing was not great, or if I'm being too picky, or if you thought it stayed like that the whole way through, and also if you thought it was a good book in general, because I think, although as I say, I got a third of the way or so into it, and I was enjoying aspects of that, and I would still like to know what happened to the rest of the characters. The next book that I read and finished was One Damned Thing After Another by Jodi. This is the first in a series about a woman who works in academia and is recruited to work at a small university where she discovers that they are actually travelling through time. They send historians through time because these are people who know the period well. They are there to observe, and they know what they're looking for to observe, to answer particular questions that people have about history. It was a really interesting concept, and it was a book that made me laugh quite a lot going through. There were still bits in it where I felt there were some inconsistencies, particularly with the dating and how time progresses in current time. I don't think the author signposted things as well as she thinks she did. The main example of that is that at some point something happens to a character and she reflects that she has been at this place where she is for over 5 years. And my impression up to that point had been that she had been there for about a year. Like, it was really poor at communicating that length of time. And suddenly she talks about suddenly this woman is described as being senior. I'm thinking, but she's been on 2 live missions. She's suddenly meant to be an experienced person, and yet the audience is told, here's the first exciting mission she does. Here's her first solo mission since that one. Oh, and by the way, now she's super experienced. There was no impression given of there being more missions in between that would give this woman the experience that she suddenly is supposed to have. So apart from those little glitches that really threw me out of the story a bit, it was fun, it was interesting. I don't know if I will carry on with the series. It ties up some things quite well in that one. I think it depends on if I come across the others maybe in a charity shop or something sometime. I will see what happens. The next book that I finished in September was The Last Namsara by Kristen Ciccarelli. If you've watched one of my recent videos, you'll know this was a reread for me. This is a book about a dragon killer who is about to be married to someone that she really does not want to be married to. He is physically abusive, he is emotionally manipulative, he's a really horrible guy. Like, he's one of the bad guys from books that I have had the strongest reaction to reading. I found him really, really horrible. And she's offered a potential way out of this marriage and tries to take it, and then discovers some things are not as they appear. Perhaps the dragons have more going on than people were previously aware. It also has storytelling being a really central part of the book. And it's a lot of oral storytelling and oral histories, which I found really, really interesting. I have seen it described as young adult. I imagine that is because the main character is 18. I would not necessarily put it in that category. I think fantasy works much better for it, but take that as you will. The next book I read after finishing that was the sequel, which has just come out in the UK and in America, and that is called The Caged Queen. I won't say too much about this for fear of spoilers of the first book if you haven't read them, but this book focuses on a character who came in as a side character in the first book and is told from her point of view, and looks at how she's trying to protect her people and do the best for them, and also how misunderstandings and failure to communicate with people who are meant to be on our side can really lead to events tumbling. It's also good with the message of don't try and read others' thoughts for them. Don't assume that you know things about other people when your assumptions are based on old information or out-of-date information. The line from Hamilton came to mind about why do you assume you're the smartest in the room, and it's a very, very interesting book, and there were some good lessons from it, I think. I really liked it. The Last Namsara is one that when I read it last year, it was absolutely one of my top books I read last year. It got 10 out of 10. This one I really enjoyed. It didn't quite grab me and blow me away the same way the first one did. It was still a really good fantasy novel, and I'm probably giving it 8 stars out of 10. But I felt like, although it's a very, very good book, it felt like the first one had been planned out, and the second one was kind of more of a follow-on from that, and hadn't had as much time put into it as the first one had, which I think is often the way with people's second or third books. If they've laboured over a first one for a while and then suddenly they sell that and the publisher asks them to write more books in the series or anything. Again, love this book, but the first one in the series still stands out to me more. Those are actually all the books that I have to talk about today, which were the ones that I finished in September. However, in October I've already finished 3 books that I will be able to talk to you about, so my end of October video is going to be a bit longer, or a bit busier at least. I'd love to hear what you've read recently, if you've read any of these books, what you thought of them, and I will see you in another video soon. Bye!